Hello there and welcome. In this lesson we're going to learn about enums and structs in C#. An enum is a special data type that contains a group of related values that are usually stored as names. So how do we create an enum? Obviously it should be placed in a class, but for now let's just see how it looks inside of the program. We're going to use the enum keyword, and then we're going to provide the type. So maybe we want to create an enum that will contain all the different difficulties in the game. So we can name this enum type difficulty. Then we use these curly braces, and inside we're going to add all the different types or values for this enum. So easy, medium, hard, expert, and obviously you can add more, but you get the point. This will always be a certain amount of items and they're all related to difficulty. So this is the enum and these are the values of this enum. Now how can we use this? Well, we can just create a new variable with a type of difficulty. So now this will be the data type. It's an enum, but it's of type difficulty. And we can name the actual variable game difficulty. And we're going to set it to be difficulty. And now you can see that it gives us all these options, all the different values of difficulty. So it's much easier to work this way. And we're going to set it to be medium. And it's going to give us some error because of, yes, usually when we create this, we should place it in a different file or in a class. So if we place it here, it will work. And that's just because of this program file. So if we have a need to create a set of items that are related, we're going to use an enum. And now this game difficulty enum is of type, or basically has this value of medium. And if we print this, then it's going to say medium. Now at first it may look a bit weird and you may not know when exactly to use this, but as you develop more experience, you're going to understand that this is very useful and you can use this to make your code much easier to understand and work with. Another thing that we can do is add numbers or numbered values to these enums. So for example, easy will be 1, medium will be 2, hard will be 3, and expert will be 4. And it doesn't have to be by this order, right? We can just give them any number that we want. But let's say we want something like this, so we can convert this difficulty, this medium difficulty, and cast it into an integer. We talked about casting before. And the value here will be 2. And then we can basically print it or something. And we're going to see 2. This is useful, for example, if you're working with some web requests and then you create an enum that is named error code. And then we can create different types of error codes. Obviously, there are a lot of them. So not found will be 404. Server error will be 500. Unauthorized will be 401, right? So I did not make up these values. These are actual error codes that exist when we make web requests, but now you can use them and you can get the value when you need to. So you can have some kind of web request, and then if you get an error code, you can use the name, you can use the value, and it's much easier because you have all your options. So if you need to create a new error code, then you don't need to add or look for something because everything will be available. These are all the options. So the only values for this error code enum are the values that you store over here. Now, of course, we can do many things with these enums. Maybe we have an enum that is going to be game state. And then we can have main menu, playing, paused, game over. So maybe you want to check what is the game state at this point, what is the player doing, and then running some code depending on the state. You don't want to add all of this into some kind of list of strings because it's going to be messy. Instead, you're creating a game state, and these are all the available states. So then you can check or basically set some kind of game state. So current state, playing. And imagine that this thing can change when the player does something else. And then we can do some conditional logic and say, if the current state is game state is playing, so this way you can run some code that will be relevant when the player is playing. Or you can check another thing. Maybe you want to check if the player is in the main menu. So when the state changes to main menu, then you're going to execute some other code that is related to the main menu. Doing this with a list or an array of strings will just be very messy and very inefficient. And obviously we can also treat these enums as regular data types. We can do whatever we do with regular data types. For example, pass them as parameters into methods. We're going to ask for difficulty and then start the game with the difficulty. So then when you're going to call this method, you're basically going to provide a difficulty, and it may be easy, medium, hard, and this way we can do different things. So there's a lot of uses for this, and you're going to understand how to better use this over time. So now that we know what a enum is, we can actually use this inside of our project. So let's go to Pokemon, and maybe we want to have a type of Pokemon, right? Each Pokemon has a type, so maybe we want to specify the type of this Pokemon. Obviously, we can create a string like this and say Pokemon type, but you get the problem. We can set whatever we want inside of this string, and then we need to manage this as a string. We can do this, but it will be much easier to just create an enum of type Pokemon type and then have a set amount of items that will be the only options. So let's delete this, and we can add this enum anywhere we want inside this class. We can add them outside of the class as long as it's also public. So public enum, and maybe it's going to be a part of this class. So we can add this here, maybe after these fields, public enum, and we're going to name it Pokemon type. And then we can decide what are the types. So in Pokemon we have normal, fire, water, grass, electric, let's say ground, psychic. There are a lot more, right? They added more types. Let's just use the basic ones. And then we can create this field over here, public Pokemon type. So this is the type of data type. And we're going to name it type. And also have this getter. And now when we create a new Pokemon, we also need to provide the Pokemon type. So now if we create a new Pokemon, new Pokemon, we need to provide an ID, a name. We also need to provide a list of attacks. Oh, obviously we did not add this into the constructor. So let's add this into the constructor. Pokemon type. We're going to make the type let's have a capital T. Type will be type. And now over here, we also need to provide the Pokemon type. So we're going to say ID1, name Bulbasaur. Attacks will be a list of attacks. So new list say razor leaf. Let's just have one. And then we also need to provide the Pokemon type, and that's the beauty of it. It gives us all the different options. So these are the only options we can provide. So Bulbasaur is grass type, so we provide the grass type. Now this can be confusing, but that's just because our Pokemon type enum was created inside of the Pokemon class, so we also need to specify the class that it contains. So Pokemon is the class that contains the enum, and then we use this dot, and then the type. If this enum was outside of the class, so if we place it outside over here, then we don't need to add this Pokemon. We can just say Pokemon type grass. And now we can check Pokemon and get the type. Where is it? Not this one, but there are different things that are built in with C#, so we don't really know if this type is the one that we're trying to use. Let's just rename it so it will be clear. A type, Pokemon type. And also this one here. Okay, this one, Pokemon type. And we can simply print this. And we can see over here, grass, because we set the type of the Pokemon to be grass. So now we can also reference it, and it will tell us the type of Pokemon. Obviously, we can do many more things with it. For example, we can even create a list of Pokemon type of these enums, and this will be a list of weaknesses. So these are all the weaknesses of this Pokemon. It will be much smarter to have some kind of general manager that will check what are the weaknesses of a grass type and then just apply it on each Pokemon instead of having these weaknesses inside of each Pokemon. But it doesn't really matter. Now we have a list of weaknesses, and again we can add this as parameters into the constructor, or maybe we can just set this later. But the point is that we can use these enums as any data type, okay? We don't need this right now. Now, for example, if we want to get all the Pokemon by the type, we can go to the Pokedex and create this kind of method. We can say, let's copy this entire method and say print all Pokemon by type. Then we're going to provide a Pokemon type, and it will search for all the Pokemon that has this type. So for each Pokemon in Pokemon list, if Pokemon type is equals the type that we are passing inside, then simply print the Pokemon name. Or maybe also print something here before you do the loop. These are all the Pokemon. These are all the type Pokemon. By using this toString method on a type, we can basically convert it into a string. So now it will print these are all the something Pokemon, and it will list all the Pokemon that have this Pokemon type. And then we can simply call this method when we want. So let's create this quick. Let's create a Pokedex object. So we don't need anything, but we're going to add a few Pokemon inside. So Pokedex add Pokemon, and we're going to add, we need to add Pokemon. So new Pokemon, and this will be 1. Bulbasaur. We need to add a list of attacks, and we need to add a Pokemon type. It's kind of annoying to always add the attacks, so let's just remove this requirement for the attacks from the constructor. Okay, we don't want to do this each time. Maybe we can add this later, or maybe we can have some kind of dictionary that will have all the attacks for a Pokemon type or something like that, but I just don't want to add this each time. We can create a method to set the attacks, okay? Otherwise, it's just annoying. So now it will not require us to provide these attacks, but we do need to provide the Pokemon type. So Pokemon type, grass. Now let's do this a few more times. Okay, so I just created some Pokemon. These are the first 9 Pokemon, and this goes by their actual ID. Then we jumped to Oddish just because it's a grass Pokemon, and I can show you it for an example. And also Gloom is also a grass type, and these ones are water, and these ones are fire. So now we can, after we added these Pokemon into the Pokedex, we can use our Pokedex and say print all Pokemon by type. And we need to provide a type that we want to filter. So we're going to provide the Pokemon grass type. And now when we run this, it's going to print only the grass Pokemon. So you can see these are all the grass Pokemon because we set it over here inside the method. These are all the type Pokemon. Okay, so these are all the grass Pokemon: Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, Oddish, and Gloom. So it only printed the grass types. And this is why enums are very, very useful. So I don't want to delete this part because maybe we are going to use this for examples later. So let me just move this down. And now I want to talk about structs. A struct is kind of a lighter version of a class. So it's when we want to create a structure with some methods and some variables, and we want to treat it as a class, but we don't want all the complexity of a class. First of all, we won't be able to change the values later, we won't be able to use inheritance and complicated things like that, but we still want to have some kind of basic structure. This is useful for things that need to look like an object, but these are simple objects. And to create a struct, we simply, again, this will probably be inside some other class or file. We say struct player, and then we do exactly like we do inside of a class. We can have a public string name, public string score, maybe also a constructor. Just know that structs don't have a default constructor, so if we don't have a constructor for them, it's not going to automatically create a constructor, so we need to provide a constructor. It's going to be problematic because both of them have the same name, so either we give them different names, or we can do something that is used a lot. Maybe we have this underscore. Usually it's used when the fields are private and we want to separate between these ones and these ones. So this way we can say underscore name and equals name. Or we can do something else, this name. So if we did not have this, we can say this name equals name. This means that it belongs to this class. And by the way, we can do this in regular classes as well, okay? So it's not just relevant for structs. And obviously this is an int, so this should be an int as well. Then we can also add a method. And for example, public void display play info, and then print some kind of Now, if we want to use this struct, we're simply going to create a type of the struct, so player, new player, and then we need to provide these things exactly like with a class. So first of all, we need to provide a name and a score. So it's very similar to a class. We can then reference things inside of this struct, maybe call a method, or do whatever we want. But the point is that we create these structs when we want a very simple kind of structure and we don't want to use all the complexity of a real class. Let's say player name. We can set the name, we can print the name, we can do whatever we want. And again, structs are not used that much. They're used especially for built-in things. For example, in Unity, we have vectors and we have small objects that are used for different things. So these objects are created using structs instead of full classes because they really don't need all the information a class can contain or all the complexity of a class. So that's all for this lesson. If I forgot something, you can ask me in the comment section if you have specific questions about enums, if you still don't understand, and I will explain it to you. Again, we're going to use all of these things over and over in our course with more examples, so don't worry. And of course, when you finally start reading other people's code or watch tutorials, you're going to see all of these things in real life, in practice, and you're going to get more and more experience. Because at this point, it's understandable that you still don't have everything figured out, okay? So that's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you're still not a subscriber. It will support me a lot. You can also leave a like. You can become a member of the channel, and you can check other videos as well. So I'll see you next time.